I'm very grateful to Extension Foundation and the NTAE program for letting me be here today. For those of you who attended past sessions, these are really designed to be as interactive as possible. So throughout today's session, I'm going to be calling out some specific questions, some of them just verbally, some of them on the screen. My goal is for us to learn from one another because I have some experience in this space, but you all bring diverse expertise, perspective well beyond what I'm going to offer you today. I will give you a few disclaimers about today's presentation in a moment. Again, these are to spark thinking, creativity, and maybe give you a new framework for the work that you do day to day, especially when it comes to, grant seeking, fundraising, etc. I'm also really excited today. Early on in the session, I'm going to call in a special guest co-host and Ann Tacker, a grant specialist for Extension Foundation. She reached out and had some really great insights that I couldn't agree more with. And so early in the session, one of the strategies we'll talk about is going to be her giving us some insights based on what she's seen on both sides of the grants table, right? The reviewer side and the submitter. So let me start today's session with just a quick story. For those of you who don't know me, I came from the world of agriculture, so I worked in ag media and business for many years before I started my consulting practice. And my probably sort of feet to the fire moment with grant proposals came when USDA announced a big award. I won't call out names or anything like that, but the organization I had the privilege of working with at the time, my president said, you know what, there's this really tremendous opportunity for us to make a difference for farmers and ranchers related to education and awareness around conservation agriculture, practice implementation, practical resources, etc. And so she said somebody needs to build a proposal that we can submit with the partners that we have at the table. So there was a lot of hemming and hawing, and I will be the first to raise my hand and say I had my doubts. But it came to the point where it was like go time. Either we're going to do this or we're not. And so I said, look, I'll volunteer. And I'm sure many of you probably can relate because at some point at the end of the day, nothing is going to get proposed if one person doesn't at least take the lead to assemble the people and the resources for the job. And so my job was to sort of cobble together various partners, think through the program of work, what are the outcomes that we're going for at the end of the day to make a benefit for rural communities, for farmers and ranchers, and then let's propose it. And I'll tell you how that ended at the end of our presentation today, but it can be a very intimidating process, and I'm sure many of you can relate. I'm curious, as we move into today's session, if you would go ahead and drop in the chat, what is your level of comfort with grant proposal development? So I'm talking about researching your subject, defining what you're asking for, building the program of work, putting it all in writing. Any of those pieces I'm sort of collectively describing under the umbrella of grant proposal development. So very curious sort of the spectrum of experience, comfort level, love it, hate it, somewhere in between. Again, I know we're all here to learn, so there is no shame in whatever your response might be. Let me give you a sense of the three sort of core learning objectives for our session today. And again, as I said in the subtitle, I think grant proposal development, if you have the right mindset and the right resources at your disposal, can be a lot of fun. And it gives you as extension professionals an opportunity to really shine. And having been a key informant, as was mentioned a moment ago with the NTAE program, it's been so fun to just see the depth of experience, knowledge, ideas that come through in the projects that you're working on, both actively funded and potentially new funding you might be pursuing in the future. So the first thing I want to talk about is some strategies that you can maybe think about using or experiment with when it comes to developing your own proposals. So it's going to involve how to use the budget to inform your program of work, brainstorming about what that project actually looks like, using tools like mind mapping, and then problem solving collaboratively, right? Working as a team. Too often, I think we feel like trapped into the I alone can save the day. And the reality is, and I think Extension probably knows this better than other organizations, even in the corporate world, which is the more we leverage people's unique expertise and talents and ideas, the stronger the proposal will be. And I see collaboration happening across the Extension system. So that's awesome. And I think you can only build on that. I see lots of people in here, some intimidated by large grants, some are like, I'm doing this every day in my sleep. I love it. Okay, so there's a diversity of experience here, but we have some superpower and also some who are continuing to learn and gain comfort, and that's awesome. The second piece is just processes for roughing out your first draft without losing your mind, right? Sometimes the hardest part is getting from concept to reality. So I'm hoping to share some ideas or strategies that might help you sort of break through that initial barrier of this is so overwhelming or so large. Where do I start? And then finally, I call it echolocation. I think there are some ways you can make sure that you are more accurately aligning your proposal, your program of work, your budget narrative to the specific requests and needs of funding organizations or agencies that you are applying to. Again, you may come to the end of this session and say, all of these things I'm already doing. If so, awesome. I hope this reinforces that and says, keep going. On the other hand, there may be some things that are new or it's a different way of thinking about it. And so I hope that can be helpful to you as well. All right. So I've asked you about your level of comfort. Now I want to drill a layer deeper. What would you consider your number one biggest pain point? What's the biggest challenge when it comes to putting together a grant proposal in your experience? I'm going to take a drink of water and I'm going to wait to see what pops into the chat. But again, this question really involves what is the biggest challenge for you when it comes to getting a grant proposal off to the races? Okay, I love these responses. These are totally authentic and totally resonate with me. So merging the granting organization's interest with your own, Claire, thank you. Paula says dealing with other team members, grant writing phobia. It's not for everybody, and sometimes even when it's supposed to be your role, you don't want it. So I get that. Terrence writes time constraints. Extension does not stop. Absolutely, you're juggling a ton of responsibilities, none of which are going on pause to give you that flexibility to work on your grant. So absolutely. Chase, meeting everyone's expectations while still remaining within what the funder's expecting, right? So trying to balance all of those, maybe competing or trying to figure out where is the Venn diagram of overlap that everyone can agree on to move forward. Yes. Yeah, getting what you need from collaborators, Sarah. Getting letters of support, letters of commitment, understanding what specific vendors or contractors might be doing to support your work, 100%. Time and getting everyone on board, Megan. Zareen, federal grants uploading, yes, absolutely. Having someone navigate you or learning all of them, and then someone makes an update on their website, that can be really frustrating, not to mention challenging to actually getting that submission. I love all of these, so I'll stop reading all of them, but you can take a look. Thank you for all of the comments. That's super helpful. Um, so we'll try to address at least some of these ideas, especially the time question. Maybe some ideas for getting everyone aligned. And again, you may look at these and say this is pie in the sky. It's not reality, and that's okay. Again, maybe there's a piece of some of these that will resonate. This is about me. We'll send the file after the session today, but again, have been spending the past 16 years in communications, business development, fundraising, etc., specializing in agriculture. But again, I'm hopeful that no matter what function you hold within Extension, there can be something of value here. As I mentioned, here's the disclaimer. Some of these ideas may work for you, some of them may not. You don't have to use all of these strategies. I did go ahead and number them just so I can easily talk about them in this presentation today, but they are not listed in any particular order, maybe with the exception of the very first item. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and jump straight into strategies. So strategy number one is anchor your proposal in the budget. And I'm going to give full credit to Ann Tacker and with Extension Foundation, a grant specialist there. Ann had reached out and graciously shared some of her experiences about really getting the proposal development process off on the right foot. So I'm not going to steal her thunder. Ann, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, I would love for you to take a crack at giving us some voiceover on the points that we've listed here.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Nate. I just share what I've learned by the seat of my pants. Um, I wrote some notes down. The first thing that I always told the new PIs when I was giving them training was start early and start often, and then read the RFA again, and go back and read it again. When you think you've got it all, you're going to still find something in there. And with more practice, you're going to learn how to pick out the things that are really important. When I'm working with budgets with someone, I go to the budget section and I read what's the maximum amount that they're going to fund. Is it $200,000? Is it 500,000? Is it 50,000? You need to know what the cap is. And then when you're looking at allowable expenses, will they fund equipment? Will they fund tuition remission? Will they fund, um, there's one of the federal agencies that they will not fund a cost of living adjustment. So you need to factor that in. Um, so there's a lot of things to read about the budget guidance. Another that's very, very important is limits on indirect costs. Will they fund indirect, and are they putting a limit on it? Since most of us are in ag and do a lot with USDA NIFA, which is no, I can't tell you what the acronym stands for. National Institute of Food and Ag. There we go. They have a mandate from it's in the Farm Bill that your indirect calculation is tricky. You have to use either 30% of the total federal funds awarded, so 30% of the whole grant is indirect, or you use your negotiated indirect rate, and you have to compare the two and use whichever is the lesser. Now, I see people get scared when we start to talk about that. My best advice for you is find out who on your campus can help you. If you have grant support people in your college, if there aren't, there certainly should be somebody in the main office of research that can help you. You don't have to do this alone. Get help and learn how to do it, or learn the basics and rely on the people who can help you. Again, start early, start often. Um, when you're looking for allowables, you also need to read the rest of the RFA and find out, are you required to attend a meeting? Is there an annual meeting of the group that you have to attend? Well, if you don't put travel in your budget, you're going to have to find that money somewhere. And there are many reviewers who review like I do. The first thing I read is the project summary, and then I read your budget justification. A well-written budget justification is often going to tell me whether a project is fundable or not. And I learned this from a very well-funded PI. And that's the way I work. Okay, limits on indirect. And do you know what your indirect rate is? If you're doing outreach, you should not be using the research rate. You should be using the on-campus other sponsored programs rate, which is generally lesser. And for you, that's a good thing because that gives you more money to stick into the program. Indirect costs are necessary, and they are a good thing because they support people who help you get this done. So, but learn what your indirect rates are. Um, when you're planning your budget, if you're looking at travel, think about everything from leaving your house in that morning and wherever you're traveling to. Think about every step and everything you're going to need in there. If you live 50 miles from the airport and you don't put any travel into the airport or parking, you're going to run short. See what else Nate's got. Befriend the federal SF 424 budget form. That is a fabulous outline to use if you're Office of Research does not have a budget template to help you build your budget. When you're doing the budget narrative and the budget or justification, they're called, they're one in the same document, but it's how you explain how you're spending the money. I like to step back and think of grants as it's really, it's about two things. It's about the work getting done, but it's also the federal agency or the funder, the sponsor, has the big checkbook and you want to check out of there. Well, how are you going to spend that money? Are you going to do it responsibly? And that's where your budget narrative comes in. And you explain exactly what you want the money for, how you're going to spend it, and why it's necessary. Um, I like to see it, I like to be able to see each section written together so that I look at the numbers and I look at the description. Melanie's going to send out a package that has a couple sample budget narratives formats that are from two, they're redacted for the most part, but I have been given permission to share and use them, and they are from two ladies who were very hardworking and very well funded. So don't don't skimp on your budget narrative. There's a lot of information in there that is going to help you. Um, Unsure where to start? We can help you if you're applying for a foundation award, if you are applying to a different sponsor or a federal sponsor or could be a private sponsor. Ask questions. They want to fund good projects, and it's never hurts to contact them and say, hey, I've got this idea. Can I run it by you? Um, that will help you. And when you're reading their budget requirements, if there's something that doesn't look right or you're unsure of it, ask the questions. That's how you're going to write your very best proposal. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or I believe Nate's probably got a little Q&A time left at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, Anne, thank you so much. And yes, like Anne said, we will be having a Q&A session. I would love to bring Anne back on for that and tag team some Q&A toward the end. And thank you for sharing your experience. And again, like I said earlier, this aligns very, very much with my experience, which is, the budget is where the rubber meets the road, right? And to amplify what she just shared, a couple of things I would say. First of all, start with the end in mind, right? So you're not just going to request the money, but eventually you're going to be reporting out on outcomes delivered, right? And how the money that you requested in specific buckets was invested. And so make sure that you're thinking about a defensible case for the value that you've delivered based on the promises you made before you even had funding. The other piece is that it is exactly the right place to start here, especially if you're unsure, but in virtually any case, if you're building a $2 million program of work and the cap is, $500,000, you're going to be backward from the get-go. So start here. And then recognize there's going to be revisions, right? As you start to work with your colleagues or partners and get into the nitty gritty, you'll likely come back and make some revisions here to the points that were raised by Anne about, indirect or, again, specific considerations or requirements from your organization or your partner organizations. Again, be comfortable with being uncomfortable in sort of getting this budget fine-tuned for submission. But again, if you have this, you'll have a great foundation to start with. So thank you again, Anne. And yeah, please, any questions that emerge as you're listening to this or experiences you've had, drop those into the chat. We'll get to as many of those as we can before the end of our time together. Okay, the second piece I want to call out here, and this is not just a strategy for grant proposal development, but anytime you are trying to think through the structure of a grant or a project that you're working on, a new initiative. I historically was of the mind that, as a journalist, I would always think about sort of the inverted pyramid. And when I was putting together an article or a story of some kind, what's the biggest, most important piece of information at the top, and then sort of build all the supporting details underneath it. If you're writing, if you go back to elementary school, right, a 5-paragraph essay, which I think we've come a long way in how we teach and talk about writing. My wife happens to be a writing instructor at the University of Missouri, so we talk a lot about this. There is this idea of, that communication is very linear, when in fact our brains aren't built that way. And the way we elevate new ideas to our minds and have conversations about them is much more organic. So the mind mapping process is something that actually there are some great resources from the University of Minnesota. I'm sure there are others. My friend and fellow writer, Daphne Gray Grant, who I have quoted here, says that outlining, sort of in that traditional, 5 paragraph essay, to be very remedial, forces you into a logical, linear way of thinking. That's not a totally bad thing, of course, but it's not very creative. When you write, you want your brain to operate in the most creative way possible. You don't want to be hemmed in by anything. So, on the illustration that I've shared courtesy of Daphne, you can see that you basically are building thought bubbles. And I suspect that many of you are probably already doing this. I'm guessing Molly Immendorf and other facilitators on the call today probably are very familiar with this sort of thing. The idea is you're starting with a core topic in the center of your, white paper or whiteboard or your notebook, and then you're sort of building out corresponding ideas and thinking about all of the elements that need to ladder up to that big idea. I think I've heard others say, and I recommend that you actually start with a question in the center of your document. So, for example, let's say there's a new award coming available for climate smart agriculture, education, and outreach, and it's going to be a $500,000 cap. So, the question at the center of your mind map might be something like, what could our element or section of extension do to advance climate smart agriculture for our clients, for $500,000 question mark. And then from there, you could begin to unpack several different ideas. So for example, you might start by saying, what are active programs or services that extension offers? So active programs might be one of those bubbles coming off of this center dot. Another one might be, what are things we've talked about doing for years, but we've never pulled the trigger on, right? There hasn't been sufficient staffing, time, financial resources, etc. So get all those big ideas down. And then you might begin to think about, okay, what are specific services or deliverables that could be part of this grant proposal that we'd like to put together? So it might be, professional development, it might be field days, it might be, educational brochures or peer groups or whatever the case might be. And so the idea here is that you're not putting together all of the fine details, but you're unlocking all of these sort of aligned components. You're letting your mind wander freely. And as we'll discuss in a few minutes, if you're able to do this as a group, or perhaps do this exercise individually and then come together and compare notes, it will likely unlock new ideas, new approaches. I think one of the strategies I often see, and I don't not recommend it, is, we have a proposal on the shelf. Maybe we submitted it for funding. It didn't get funded. Let's resurrect that and make some modifications and resubmit. That can be a very fine way to proceed. On the other hand, it may make sense to take that old proposal off the shelf and break it into these component parts like you see here on the screen and say, okay, since the time we submitted this and didn't get funding, what have we learned, right? Do we have any theories about any reviewer comments that give us some indicators as to why it wasn't funded? Maybe things we need to think about adding or subtracting, given the budget, given the current environment, what this funder is after. So again, try replacing, generic outlines or long email exchanges with something like this, because it's both visual and it helps you unpack a lot of big ideas in a way that's accessible for virtually anyone. And at that point, then you can start to chunk out, okay, we think these pieces have the most potential. Now let's start to actually get this into the project summary, the budget narrative, etc. Okay. Whoop. Now I'm going backwards. That's not helpful. Okay. So I mentioned collaboration. So that's really strategy number 3. Again, I suspect this is something that's happening with most of you. I did see some comments in the chat that suggested, hey, I want to collaborate, but maybe some people on my team are less excited about collaborating, at least when it comes to writing a grant. I think there may be some ideas or strategies here that could be beneficial to you. if you have that kind of resistance, I think one great question to understand is what are the objections, right? So either probably in a one-on-one conversation, or if you have a really tight-knit, comfortable group, just unpacking. You know, I mentioned that story at the beginning of our session today, talking about how no one was raising their hand, including me. And then sort of it came time, and I ultimately said yes, but it wasn't until I overcame several objections. Your team may be the same way. Colleagues, again, people are strapped for time. People are unsure where to begin. People are very afraid of getting stuck and being on the hook when, you know, thousands, millions of dollars are on the table, and they don't want to, I think many people don't want to feel like, gosh, this is all on me, or if I screw this up, you know, I own this. This is really a group effort. This is an institutional effort. And this is something that allows you to grow and shine and really have the kind of impact that you all came to Extension to have. So just walking through a few of these bubbles here, on the left-hand side of the screen around this collaborative problem-solving dot, you see the phrase, everyone in isolation. So I think there is some level to which everyone on your team should start. If you are the leader trying to assemble a group, you know, start by saying, hey, there's this funding opportunity in the case where you have an active RFP to respond to. I have sort of three key questions for you to think about, right? I want you to think about active programs or projects that could, you know, get jet fuel if we were to submit this award and get funded. I want you to think about new initiatives or projects we've considered but haven't acted on. And I want you to think about, you know, specific activities that our institution, our extension is uniquely capable of providing or delivering. And then I want to get back as a group and discuss what you came up with, right? People often will come up with brilliant ideas on their own. Depending on your makeup, you know, your Enneagram or whatever disc or whatever personality test you ascribe to or subscribe to, you know, people may be less or more willing to share in a group setting. So starting with those individual notes, and I would actually ask for those to be sent to you to say, hey, I'm trying to get a read of how people are thinking about this, and then I'm going to compile those and we'll discuss them as a group. Again, giving people that's the safety to the degree that you can to get the best ideas coming forward. Then, you know, provide a summary is the next point. So again, thinking about a way to capture, whether it's in Google Docs or in a meeting agenda that you print out and give to everybody if you're in a physical setting. Again, really just helping people see. I know Extension sometimes uses Mural as a tool for this kind of mind mapping that I'm describing, so maybe that's where you start. But again, the idea is to really summarize and synthesize. Next, yes and, right? So this is a technique you often, if you read business books or self-improvement books, they'll talk about this idea of yes and, right? So yes, we could do field days, and I also think that it would be brilliant if we did X, right? So this is an opportunity to, you know, I think tendency is to have high emotions when it comes to grants, right? We want to get this right. We want to make sure that we're positioning ourselves as favorably as possible. And that can make us very protective of ideas or feeling like, well, based on my past experience, this was a flop, but this did great, so we should only do this, right? So yes and is a way of having dialogue with whoever is helping you or with yourself, right? Putting together a grant proposal, get as creative as possible. Don't shut down ideas prematurely. And again, you're building and iterating rather than sort of cutting people off at the pass or, you know, putting an idea in the parking lot that might actually have a lot of merit. The final piece of this strategy is, again, thinking about getting everyone into the room, either virtually or in person. I include in the slides that Melanie will distribute after the session today a link to an interview that Cal Newport did, the researcher who writes a lot about deep work, minimizing modern technologies, distractions when it comes to doing meaningful, impactful work. And he talks about some research that shows that when you have multiple, you know, smart people at a whiteboard looking at a problem together, the ideas that come forward are often stronger, richer, and have the potential to do greater good than if you were just, you know, sitting alone in isolation. So group problem solving, like physically in a physical space or a virtual space, actually has research to back up this idea that there is value here in collaborating. And again, at some point, someone has to write something, right? But this is a way to unlock those ideas and start to put structure to everything that's flowing through people's minds. Okay, I'm going to pause. Before we get to the final strategies and into our Q&A session, I want to ask, in your experience, what is the number one factor or trait that makes the best grant proposals stand out from all the others? Now, it could be that some of you have served as reviewers of other people's grants. It could be that you've submitted grants and some got awarded and others didn't. So I'm curious, just from your experience, what factors are sort of standout must have for those grants that tend to be most successful? Someone out there might say just getting it down on paper and submitting it is a miracle in and of itself, right? So that is certainly something that makes grants stand out. The grants that don't get written don't get funded. So that is a very important criteria. Love some of these comments coming into the chat. Collaboration, get to the point, don't ramble, and be general. Don't be general, Sarah says. Yes, absolutely. Being specific, calling out your unique value proposition, the specific program of work, how it ladders up to what the funder is looking for, the impact they want to have, super important, absolutely. Gloria, innovation, I love it. So creative thinking, outside of the box. How are we going to, again, advance this work in a way that hasn't been done before? I love that. Paula, networking, absolutely. More likely to get a smaller grant if you know some people, definitely. So depending on the type of funder, maybe not, federal agencies, although even then, knowing people never guarantees you something. And certainly there's supposed to be a dispassionate, very neutral perspective when it comes to reviewing grants. But again, the more people you know, the more funding opportunities you may be aware of. You may be able to guide funders in the language they include so that the kinds of work you do can be included in submission, RFPs, etc. Okay, Suzanne, strong budget information. Lisa, follow guidelines. Andra, use and, but, therefore format. Yes, so like how you structure the language of, walking the reviewer through a logical progression of your thinking so that the deliverables, the outcomes you're proposing follow from everything else you've described. Great point. Paula, plain language. Yes, speak like someone is not an expert in your area because most of them are not. Zoreen, unique idea but must make an impact. Absolutely. So you can't just come up with crazy stuff. It's got to have grounding in research and experience and data. Amy, grants that are building on a solid body of evidence, data, needs assessment, and connect the dots from the data and the needs to the proposal plans. Yes. So you've got to take this is the justification, and then how this tracks, given the kinds of work we're going to be doing, how that builds from what we know from evidence. Yes. Yes, Jane, great point. So oftentimes, applications that I've seen and been part of, frankly, get dinged because the proposal doesn't think beyond the available funding window, right? So maybe a funder is going for a 1-year award or a 3-year award, but the majority of funders want to know, how are you going to continue this impact beyond the scope of this project, right? Because we can't keep funding you, in some cases, year after year after year. So yeah, explaining that process, really important. Great thoughts. Thank you so much. These are very insightful. Okay, let's jump ahead and let's look at the last couple of strategies here. I've got 2 more for you. The first is to develop a repeatable process for roughing out that first draft without losing your mind. So I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but for real, it can be a lot to digest, as Anne mentioned earlier. Going through that RFP, not just once, but probably 2 or 3 times. There's a lot of detail there, and it takes time to process, organize it all, make sure you're not missing something. And again, this is where there is strength in numbers. Like Anne said, you should not go this alone if at all possible. It really helps to have a group, even if it's not a formally organized group. So a few ideas that I have seen effective in my work or that I've observed others, people talking about. On this first column on the left, some people really struggle, including myself on regular occasion, to actually get that first draft down on paper, right? There's so many thoughts flowing through your head. Um, I often edit myself as I'm writing, which can be very distracting and disruptive. What you need to do is just kind of dump everything down, even as raw and unedited as it is. Some people like to actually record themselves, like talking through it, right? So, one idea you might consider is that once you've had that sort of group brainstorm, you've done your mind map or other exercises to really surface the best ideas, you need to designate a person to take the lead on getting something down. That may well be people on this call today. And so if this is an area where you struggle or you tend to procrastinate, consider recording audio of yourself or go on, Zoom or whatever platform you use. Talk it through, right? It can be total stream of consciousness. But the objective here is that by sort of going through the RFP and calling out, okay, these are the specific things. We know the budget's going to require this type of activity. We know that we want to take this program and modify it for this particular funding opportunity. Talk through each of those pieces, not necessarily in depth, but enough to get some sort of substance, a couple of sentences for each piece. And then use a tool like Otter AI or something else that can take that audio you've just spoken and turn it into a written transcript. It's often not going to be perfect, as you all know, having worked with generative AI tools. We talked about that in previous workshops. But that, again, it does a couple of things, right? It prevents the procrastination. It helps you start to get ideas out of your head. And then it gives you text that you haven't had to spend time typing yourself and rethinking to actually start modifying. So as Anne said, if you have a good template, either from your specific RFP or that your institution uses, use that and sort of copy and paste lines from the transcript into the project narrative, the budget narrative, and then you at least have a foundation. You want to make sure, oh, I don't want to forget about this idea or that one. Again, if this is helpful, it won't work for everyone, but if you find yourself struggling with the writing component initially, this might be a way to get over that hurdle. The second piece I mentioned a moment ago, build yourself a template. I actually think that increasingly tools like ChatGPT or Gemini, again, assuming the RFP is a publicly available document, uploading a PDF of the RFP to ChatGPT or others and saying, carefully study, you are an expert grant proposal writer, take a look at this RFP and develop for me a template so that I make sure to plug in every single item that the reviewers are going to be asking for. My experience has been that exercise is not perfect. It will have errors, there will be gaps, and so you still need multiple sets of eyes, human eyes, on that proposal to sort of think through the gaps. But again, given that these documents tend to be dozens of pages long, given that there are often specific things that maybe the human mind would overlook simply because it would take so much time to process, it can be a good tool for organizing your thoughts and getting a sense of, okay, what are the key items here that I can't, lose sight of. A couple other things here, jot down notes and brief summaries. One thing I like to do, and I think I may have included a note elsewhere in this slide, is ask a generative AI tool to go through the RFP and call out the most common keywords, right? So what are the top 10 keywords that are used in this RFP? Then I want you to rank them by the most used to the least used within the top 10. Again, we'll talk in a little bit about this idea of echolocation, but your goal is to mirror back to the funder that you've heard what they're asking for, and your proposal is going to speak to that and still be unique and valuable and bring your expertise to the table. Once you've got those basics, sort of like a raw skeleton outline together, then I recommend sort of going through point by point with your template and deeply defining each of those. Again, you're going to want to refer back to the RFP because, like Anne said, there are often, as you all know, page limitations, word counts.
Okay, do it now then.
Please, go right ahead. Oh, sorry. Again, please type in comments and chats. We will get to those. Okay. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So deeply define those sections, pay attention to the specifics of the funder and write down the grand vision, right? Your goal at the end of the day is to get something raw and unedited for your colleagues to look at and your partners, right? And so once you get it out of your head and onto the page, then you can start sharing the burden, right? It feels like an overwhelming burden sometimes to get this all out in writing, But once you have it, it's a gift you're giving to everybody. Everybody shares the wealth and can give feedback and input. Um, and then finally, make sure that as you're doing this, you're starting with that budget piece, right? Because the budget informs everything. So really, I recommend thinking about you getting a budget in place in an Excel spreadsheet, maybe using one of the templates Anne's going to share with this group. Then once you have that budget scoped out, you can clearly describe in the project narrative what the program is going to look like. And then you can also talk about the budget narrative. I like to start with the project narrative just because I'm a creative writer, right? So I like to sort of think in big ideas and then get down to the nitty gritty of, okay, here are the line items that are going to fund those big ideas. Again, you may go at it the other way around. There's no right answer here. It does have to get done at some point, right? So again, the idea is to reduce the barriers and get you moving, get your team moving in a way that is more fun than burdensome. Okay, the last strategy I'll talk about today, and then we'll do a little bit of wrap-up surveys and move into our Q&A, is this idea of echolocation. So this is my term. Hopefully the concept resonates based on whatever level of experience you have with grants. So the first thing I would say is, again, I mentioned assessing keywords using generative AI. I think these tools are super powerful. Like, I don't have time to go through a 60-page document and determine how many times the phrase climate smart agriculture or equity or cover crops, or nutrition was used. But a tool like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, these can do a great job in, lickety split. And is it going to be perfect? No, it's increasingly getting better. And use it as a partner, right? Use it as an assistant, like, take a look at this. I have this question. And then, trust but verify. Double check your homework in the actual RFP with your own eyes. You can also split up the review among multiple people. So number 2, study the RFP. Check out the page counts, the templating, the size of the font, but also check out specific value propositions that the funder brings forward. So oftentimes the funder won't just say, here is the type of work we want to do, but we believe that, advancing equity across agriculture is very important. And so we will give preference to those that address equity specifically with these communities of people. Or it might say, we're very focused on, small and beginning farmers, or we're very focused on working in this region of the country. Like, again, this is not news to, I think, any of you on this call. But if you sort of look for those things, it will make your proposal stronger if you can address those specific values, those ideas. Again, when it comes to federal grants, keep in mind that the administration under which these proposals are made. So, right, who is in the White House? Who is actually in Congress? Who's authorizing these projects? How is the money being allocated? Like, what are the priorities of the agency, whether it's USDA or other divisions of the federal government? Again, the idea is to really understand the mindset, understand the priorities, and ensure those are reflected in your award. Again, if that is the funder that you're working with. Number 3, shaping your narrative to incorporate those keywords. Again, you're just making sure that now you understand better what the text says. Now you're actually incorporating that into your document. You're doing it authentically, right? You're not just in the world of website building, some people call this keyword stuffing, right? Where you're just throwing in lots of keywords to try to get people to click on something when they do a Google search. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about authentic use of those words, accurately reflecting, okay, here's what we're doing at Extension. As a funder, you've asked to respond to this specific need. Here's how we're going to do that, right? So it may not be language that you use in Extension, but think about how to translate and put that in the funder's words. Number 4, develop a template. We talked about this earlier. Number 5, ask others to review, right? And sometimes that may be, we're each going to take a chunk of the RFP and meet back up and compare notes. Or we're going to take the project narrative and the budget narrative, and we're each going to review this and make sure it's accurate. We're going to list out all the questions we have, and we'll come back as a group to address those together. Unlike lots of other writing where maybe a spelling error on the front page of the New York Times is embarrassing, but it's not costing anyone, hopefully, their job, with a grant, it really does matter. So there's both the storytelling piece, how do we cast a compelling vision, And there's also that technical component that Anne mentioned, right? The budget has to be tightened up to the specifications of the funder. The narrative needs to be tightened up to the specifications of the funder. So work together as a group. Again, work with tools to the degree that it's ethical and that you're allowed to do so within your institution. And again, at the end of the day, the goal is to walk away with a stronger proposal and a more seamless process that reduces the level of friction you may have experienced in grants you've pursued in the past. Those are the strategies. I know that's a lot of information to unpack. I'm going to take a quick pause. I believe, Melanie, you're going to be dropping into the chat a quick survey, if you haven't already, to just get some feedback for Extension Foundation on this session today. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to this slide where oh, no worries, Molly, at all. If you wouldn't mind taking a quick survey for me, prioritize the one from Melanie for Extension Foundation, but this will just give me a sense of, was this helpful to you? What other questions do you have? I'm going to take a quick drink of water. I want you, if you are comfortable doing so, to type in comments, questions into the chat, and then in about 30 seconds or so, we're going to transition into our Q&A. Thank you all so much. You've been very attentive. I hope this has been helpful to you, and with that, I look forward to your questions. And Melanie, I see, just dropped that survey into the chat, so please make sure before you go today to fill out the Extension Foundation survey if you do nothing else. And while you are filling out that Extension Foundation survey, I would direct your attention to the chat. And shared some really great additional insights around budgeting and the justification for why start with the money and then build the program from there. Again, you'll save yourself a lot of grief, and Anne has some great insights about that. Okay, so we're going to move into Q&A now, and I've got a question on the screen, but before we get to that, Melanie, is there anything that you saw from the group or maybe questions that were asked that we haven't yet addressed?
Yeah, one question was about past webinars, so I'll just address that now. All of these sessions are recorded and they are found in our video resource library, so I'll share the link with that. And we also have a new YouTube channel, and all of Nate's sessions are in a playlist. So I will share that. And you can also find slides and other resources that were shared within that description. And also for this session, I will be sending out, as Nate said, everything that was shared, some budget things from Anne and all the slides. So you can look forward to that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Melanie. And yeah, appreciate all that's being done to share the information, to make sure people have access, and definitely you'll get all the materials. So don't worry if you have to drop off or miss something, etc. Go ahead and type in. We have about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So Anne and I are standing by to brainstorm, talk through any questions, also observations or maybe lessons you've learned the hard way. Like I would love to hear some of those as well. So you can drop a comment in the chat, you can unmute yourself, and would love to hear your ideas. While we're waiting for that, I have a question for this group. I wonder where you and your team or your colleagues tend to get hung up during the proposal development process. And bonus points if you are able to share a tip for this group on how do you get unstuck when you get hung up on that specific issue. So I will start. I will say that in my experience, one of the most challenging pieces, for me at least, has been not just getting the initial ideas down on paper, but actually going through and editing everything with a fine-tooth comb at the end, right? Oftentimes you come to the end and you're like, okay, this says I only have 7 pages to talk about this, but I actually have 12. And so sort of coordinating the process of revising, sharpening your language, making things more concise. Again, there may be like Gen AI or other kinds of tools that can help you think creatively about how to do that. At the end of the day, though, it really forces you to crystallize what are the outcomes we're after, how are we going to get it, and what are the key data points that drive that point home most clearly. So I would encourage you as you're going through the research process, pulling out peer-reviewed studies to back up your justification or whatever it might be, think about like ranking things while you're going along or sorting them, like option, parentheses optional, whether that's a digital, note keeper or on a notebook. Really get clear early on which are the absolutely must include this or examples from past extension work that we just have to call out, and which are the ones that if push came to shove, like we would sacrifice this information because it just doesn't have the strength that the other pieces do. So again, the more you can sort of do that iteratively as you're going along, rather than saving yourself the heartburn of, okay, this proposal's due in 30 minutes. Hopefully, please don't wait till it's 30 minutes before the deadline. Like give yourself a couple of days. Ideally, I know that's not reality all the time, but that will save you a lot of heartache, I have found. Okay, Megan, thank you for your comment. We get caught up in thinking too small. We don't want to put more work on ourselves with large projects. That is a really fascinating insight, and I think that's totally right. So, actually, I was visiting with this about something totally unrelated earlier today. When we think about large scale funding, right? That might not be $1 million. It might be in your case like 50,000 or 25,000, like whatever is big in your experience. There can be this tendency to say, this sounds really exciting and great and all, you guys, but honestly, like if we got this award, think of how crushing it would be, right? We can't get our work done now, and now we're going to add all this on top of it. So there is a suspension of disbelief that you really have to, as a leader, I think it's important to encourage people, hey, I know you have these fears, right? My wife and I have been taking a parenting class, and we've been learning that validating our kids' emotions really important, right? I'm not equating your colleagues to kids, but there's some times when just as human beings, it's very important that we validate like these concerns are real, whether it's lack of funding, lack of time, lack of people, and these things are figure outable, right? So the more that we can think big, our goal at Extension is to have impact in X, Y, and Z areas for A, B, and C clients. How can we best do that, right? If the sky were the limit, if we had no parameters, if all of our projects were to be put to the side, like what would we dream of doing? For some people that can feel a little bit like, mushy and weird. But the more you can advocate for that kind of thinking, again, we would not be where we are today with space travel or immunizations, or you pick the innovation that's happened across agriculture or science, if people had not dared to dream big and frequently get shut down, right? And frequently face many obstacles. My business coach recently recommended the book The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, which talks a lot about Stoic philosophy. Maybe sounds boring to you, but it has completely changed how I think about virtually every challenge that I face in my life and my business. So The Obstacle is the Way, great book, highly recommended, very accessible, and again, pulls anecdotes from across history showing how people have overcome this kind of thinking, like, oh, this is going to be a big thing, I'm not going to be able to make it. So again, lead by example, validate those concerns, and then find ways to have the conversation anyway, recognizing that you can solve those objections that you're hearing. And again, it's not easy, but it is doable. Avik asks, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, please forgive me if I'm not. What are the potential small funding sources under $100,000 for pilot studies in agriculture? Send me an email. I'm happy to have that conversation. That's probably like a more of a research-oriented question, but I'm certain there are opportunities out there. I can't guarantee it, but something I'd be happy to look into. I'm going to drop my email address into the chat here. Thank you for the question. Jane writes, sometimes you have to stop that brainstorming and get things on paper. Oh, I'm glad to hear the mind map. Yeah, try the mind map, see if that's helpful. I think you're right. There's like a big gap when it comes to, I've got to get this done. I would rather do just about anything. Like I'll go vacuum the carpet instead of doing that. Just do it. Find ways to get through the noise in your own head and just get people brainstorming and thinking creative. Like make it fun, right? Get lunch or something and enjoy. Okay, Paula writes, yes, starting with smaller grants, much easier. Yeah, so if you're new to grants and this is part of your function as an extension professional, start somewhere, right? And just get to know the process. Study RFPs, like think about your particular area of agriculture, and you can go on, grants.gov or GrantStation. I use a paid tool called Instrumental. Again, there are lots of options to sort of get you thinking about how do funders write RFPs? What are they looking for? What topics or issues are trending? All of those things can inform your process. Um, okay. Oh, Anne, thank you for jumping in. That's perfect. Um, Let me stop there. So I've given my perspective on this question of the idea that, oh, we're going to be so overwhelmed if we get this grant. And I'm curious from your experience if there's any words of insight you'd like to share with the group on how to work through some of the objections that may come up in deciding to pursue a grant proposal.
I may not be the best person to ask about that because my philosophy has always been if you don't submit a proposal, I can guarantee you're not going to get the funding. So I'm the kind of the cheerleader that goes, "Hey, yeah, what can I do to help you? Let's pull it together." Um, one thing that I don't think either one of us addressed is one of the very best educations I ever got in grant writing, or I hate calling it grant writing because you're not writing the grant, you're writing a proposal that gets you the grant. The grant is the funding. Anyway, that's a semantics thing. And it's kind of one of my little hot buttons. But the very best education I got was serving as a reviewer or going. And the very first time I did this, I sat back in the corner trying to be, the mouse in the corner, just observing. That is huge. So look at look at what opportunities there might be to serve as a grant as a reviewer um, on a national level. It may be way outside your realm and you may feel totally under equipped. However, you're going to learn so much and talk to the program officer. That's one thing that I see a lot of new people, they're afraid to talk to the sponsor. They're afraid to talk to the program officer because they think I've got this PhD, I should know it all. Well, you know what? Your learning is just starting. And granted, extension's a little bit different than research, but um, talking to the program officers were in your shoes at one point and they remember what it's like. And they most of the time they're extremely helpful. So that's one thing that, like I said, I don't think either one of us addressed. Early on, I worked with people who were getting funding from NIH, and this NIH has boiled it down to you need three things. First, you have to have a good idea. If you don't have a good idea, it's probably not going to get funded. Second, you have to have the team to do the work. You may only be able to do this much of this project. You may need to pull in an outside evaluator. Evaluation has become a far more important component than it ever has been when I first started. So you may only be able to do this much. Find that person that can do this other little part and get them on board. So you need the idea. You need to have the qualified people to do the work, whether that's you or a team of people. The third thing that you need is the facilities or a place to do the work. Now, again, this kind of comes from bench science to where I may not have the capability to do certain testing on, let's say I need to test the wheat seed for something. And I don't have the capability to do that. Well, find out who does and get them involved, whether it's a contract or whether it's a sub-award. So I think if you kind of boil it down to those three things, it's really overarching and it somewhat simplifies it too, takes it down to a simplest level. Um, I can tell you anecdotes day in, all day long, but uh, find out who your help people are. Um, in your institution, and talk to people who are in the same boat as you, the new people or the extension people. What did you find worked? What didn't you? Um, always ask for the feedback from any proposal that you submit. You're going to learn a lot from that feedback, and you may find that you were really close to getting the award, but you were just missing this little thing. Maybe it was preliminary data. You get a little bit, you find somebody who can help fund you your preliminary data, and you get that, and you come back and you submit it again. I'm looking for the question that Avik, and again, I apologize if I'm murdering your name. I have a difficult name, so I'm watching for that. For pilot studies, um, potential sources, USDA does have small awards to help you get preliminary data. And Nate, help me out here. I am drawing a complete blank as to what they call it.
Ooh, I'm not
Shoot.
sure. I probably know the answer, but it may escape me today.
Yeah, it's escaping me too. The other thing, find out that if you're a new investigator, man, always find out any little thing that can give you a little bit of an advantage. Check that box. Absolutely check that box. I'm a firm believer in any advantage you can take or you can get that's going to give you a leg up. Go for it. Um, it sometimes it sounds a little calculating, but go for it. It's not capacity building. It's in the. I'll look. I'll stop yammering and I'll look it up.
No, that sounds good. Thanks, Ann. No, those are great. Those are great insights, and I think you're right. There's a lot of creative ways to think about the type of work you're trying to do, the outcome you're achieving, and then again, Molly shares some great ideas, right? Capacity building grants, etc. So there's lots of options. Again, conferences or events that you're putting on, lots of potential out there. Um, Here's a question for the group. How do you vet your proposal to ensure it meets the RFA criteria? Once you have a proposal in writing, how are you working with your colleagues, with other partners to sort of triple check your homework? I'm very curious to hear strategies that you all have found to be effective. I'll share my experience, which is that the more people you can have on it, obviously, you need people who are boots on the ground, who are actually going to be executing the work, assuming it gets funded. And you also need people who are financially on the hook, right? Leadership at your institution who would ultimately be, guiding the receipt of the funds and those kinds of things. So really making sure that your finance colleagues are looking at it, making sure that the program implementation folks are looking at it. And also, it can be very easy to go sideways with a partner if you said one thing in a conversation 2 months ago, and then it comes time to submit and suddenly the details have changed. So the more you can proactively work on this together, I'm not suggesting all of your partners need to look at every single detail of the project, but make sure that anything that will affect outside parties gets their full attention and has their blessing. Get that in writing, have a face-to-face or a virtual conversation to confirm. Those are the kinds of things that I found. Again, you've all reviewed the RFA, hopefully, and you are, again, making sure that you're in alignment together as a team and then with the actual funding proposal. Melanie, I see you just dropped a comment in the chat. So while we're waiting on any last questions, would you like to talk about extension skills?
Sure. Yeah. So Extension Skills is a professional development opportunity for Extension Foundation and member institutions. And as we were talking, a lot of the questions that came up and the topics that Nate has covered, we will be continuing in Extension Skills through the rest of the year. So on the page that I shared, that's the registration page. You can see the 2024 schedule, and so you can see the topics that are coming up. So if you any of those jump out at you, we would love to have you join us, and those sessions are also recorded. So I just wanted to plug that as there's a lot of overlap in those upcoming sessions. Thanks, Nate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melanie. Yeah, be sure to check out the link in the chat that Melanie dropped there. And seed grant. Thank you. So I think that's what maybe the question was addressing. Like seed grants can get a project off to the races without sort of, millions of dollars in funding, but again, something that can allow you to get started. Thank you, Anne, for researching that.
Yep.
Um,
And it's a shorter amount of time.
Gotcha.
Two,
Okay, good qualification.
2 years usually versus 5 years, and a lesser amount of money, and 7 pages of project narrative versus 15.
Hey, bonus, you don't have to write as much. Very nice. Thank you, Anne. That's really helpful. Well, I'm not seeing other questions, so again, happy to take them. I know we have until 15 after the hour, but I know many of you may have to jump, so I wanted to share that on August 29th, so we're doubling up this month, we'll have another workshop like this one, navigating grant challenges, right? So there may be unexpected changes to your budget. There may be people that are more difficult to work with than others. I'm sure everyone you work with is an angel, but sometimes you run into hurdles, and so we'll talk a little bit about interpersonal leadership and management and administration of grants. So come prepared with your questions, both the good and the bad, about running a grant, implementing it, assuming you get funding. And certainly we hope everyone here is able to go out and secure some great awards for great impact. I've included my contact information here. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, happy to stick around for a few more minutes for any questions. If not, though, I'm very grateful for everyone taking the time, and appreciate you sharing your expertise. Melanie, thanks for bringing us all together. Have a really great afternoon, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much, Nate and Anne. We'll see you guys next time.
Awesome. Thanks so much. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.